So, what are David's faults in this communication? Number one, he is breaking the law in the UK and many other jurisdictions. He is giving medical and prescriptive advice without being a licensed doctor. The disclaimer is a one line admission, it is not enough. At no stage there's a mention that a doctor must read those recommendations and approve them for the patient. David used to give a much longer disclaimer and that was way more detailed, as seen in my personal correspondence with him. But let's assume for a minute that David is a doctor. This is further unethical conduct, at the very least, in this communication. Number one, the patient says that he is a 66 years old male who mentions in a very short paragraph he has a history of potentially serious heart disease and takes SSRIs and benzos for many years, but doesn't supply any detailed information on those. A doctor should have a serious and long intake interview where the patient needs to go through his whole history and all the medications the patient is taking and what they are for. He would ask the patient if he was using other substances such as weed, alcohol, tobacco products, etc. In fact, I was in a meeting today with a doctor for another problem that I have, and that was one of the first things he asked because tobacco can severely delay the healing of the body. In this case, an operation where they wanted to remove something from my skin. He would ask how the patient receives his benzos, if he has support network of any kind, family, friends, and health professionals. He would follow up with the patient every few weeks at least. With David being regarded in his group as smart, an angel, etc., in defamatory post about me, and in many other places with him barely participating in the group actively or responding with a humbling response, that he is just effectively copying and pasting taper methods that can be easily calculated by the patient or his family members. If the patient is having mental cognitive symptoms, then the family can help. The layperson would assume that David could replace his physician, in my opinion. That's how my conclusion from everything that I've seen in the groups. No verification of identity or a proper discussion, not even a chat of the issues. Communication is done over emails. This and potentially just two. This would be a serious malpractice lawsuit in the making if the person was a real person and decided David caused him serious harm, or if he dies and the family decides to pursue David. This type of communication is simply unprofessional. Chats too. So for me, for example, I talk to most people in a video chat, and and those are usually friends, and because I only had one person that I actually charge until now, and I don't like chatting with them. Some of them don't want, if they're friends and they don't want to talk to me on the phone because they are in very severe withdrawals and they can't even it triggers them. Voice and video can trigger them, and so I do it, but I'm reluctantly doing it because that's not good communication. The communication should always be at least vocal over the phone or WhatsApp, Zoom, Skype, better face to face or video call. In fact, I'm going to add here that really it should be, if the patient is not able to talk on the phone with a family member or someone else, or a carer. It can't be even a social worker. It can't be done with chats really if you want to give proper advice. David ignores the request from the patient for water taper, so he asks for a water taper very specifically in the subject. There are simply too many instances throughout my examples where David is confused, doesn't understand the pills, for example, what they weigh, or what's the size. The patient is simply provided a lot of information that's not relevant to the request and can be very confusing. He gives him confusing dry taper plus what seems to be an oral solution. And David has no idea where the patient lives and what is available for him, nor does he ask for this information. That changes in later correspondences that I had with him with other pseudo patients. He mentions Ashton with no further information on who she is. To top it off, only when I made this video after reading this plan many, many times before did I realize that he meant with 20 milligrams to 18 milligrams that he is going in 2 milligram step. It's not 20 to 18, it's 20, 18, 16. I believe he meant, when I read it, I believed he meant 20 milligrams, 90 milligrams, 18 milligrams, 17, etc. But now I understand he is going to by the Ashton manual, which is formatted in a much clearer way. This is a repeated issue. His formatting and table plans are very confusing. It gets much worse in my next examples. This is actually somehow readable. The Ashton manual is outdated, twice at least in the UK formally. NICE guidelines and the monthly prescribing guidelines, and that's all the ones that I know of. I don't live in the UK. And informally through the groups including beating benzos as well as around the world. David knows very well that the last few milligrams in diazepam are very hard to cut for many people, and much smaller cuts are needed. The NICE guidelines make it very clear that the cuts must be between 5 to 10% of the previous dose every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the symptoms, coming down from 10 milligrams to 1 milligram in crude linear steps. 1 milligram, as David mentions, is not recommended. He just copied and pasted Ashton manual instead of linking the full manual to Larry and asked him to follow that. But in any case, that's exactly what the doctors are doing. They were taught, maybe if they were taught, that they need to cut the pill basically, either linearly or cut it in half and then half and then half and so on, faster than than it should be. David and Rosalind group was supposed to keep everyone updated with the latest research and to minimize, suffering and potential cold turkey by doctors by giving the right information. They know that this is not only not correct anymore, that the new research shows that it's absolutely important to follow either the NICE guidelines or the theory of the monthly prescribing guidelines, which I'll talk about later in here. To prove that David knows better, as you can see from my previous examples of my own taper that David gives me 1.5 years before this one, David does offer a taper plan that follows the NICE guidelines. He also lies in his argument with me in the Facebook group Benzo Withdrawal Accelerator Recovery about that, claiming he is following the NICE guidelines. The monthly prescribing guidelines doesn't support this taper plan. Their theory follows the graph of the NICE guidelines almost perfectly, except for the small tail at the end, and the main concern and criticism is that their taper plan examples that they give are crude and don't use a scale, so don't actually follow their own research into receptor occupancy in baboons studied in studies done by other people, 2 studies. However, they are still much better than the Ashton. Instead of acknowledging the knowledge of Terry, he gaslights him and tells him it's too complicated when in fact the monthly prescribing guidelines is a book that is relatively easy to read and is only 60 to 70 Australian dollars or maybe 30 to 50 US dollars as a digital book on Amazon Australia. With all its serious shortcomings that I bring in the review of this book and the inability of Mark Horowitz, one of the writers of this book, to communicate with me, it is 1000% better than the Ashton manual and would be more convincing to the average GP than what David presents. Ironically, David claims to be talking to the authors of those guidelines, but I have never seen him mention it in the groups. And it seems that he ignores the recommendations despite it being 9 months after it came out. Rosalind even posted a public post in her profile where David is basically reading the book in March 2024. So again, the same message to start with, including the admission instead of a proper disclaimer. We are again going to assume David is a doctor for the sake of conversation about these taper plans and recommendations that he gives. This time, a story was even more serious. Larry is a 74 years old male with serious life-threatening conditions, medical issues. He is taking a very high dose of clonazepam, 5 milligram. That's the equivalent of 100 milligram of diazepam, a crazy amount that most doctors, in my opinion, would not even think about giving to anyone unless a very serious medical condition calls for it. Of course, my doctor wanted to give me up to 4 milligrams, so there are pretty bad doctors out there. Larry also mentions he's taking other medications, more benzos and antidepressants, but never details them in the other information section. Larry requested a liquid microtaper. They seem to have added liquid taper and a dry cut taper options. I don't remember exactly what options there were, but I remember I think only two. I don't know because the website is down while I'm making this video right now. But it's actually quite confusing because liquid taper can be water taper, milk taper, or as David mentions in his guides, a liquid solution from the manufacturer, which is neither. It's a completely different method of manufacturing. Milk is potentially a whole lot better to use for liquid tapering than water, but it's never mentioned. I explained that in my video on why I don't think water taper is good. What is it about milk that is better? Larry also mentions alarmingly that he had 2 heart surgeries in 1 year and he's very ill, quotes. He also mentions he has bipolar disorder. There are 2 types of bipolar disorder, but he doesn't mention which. And in any case, that's well beyond David's qualifications, even if he was a general doctor. It is a very serious mental disorder that needs to be managed by a specialist psychiatrist. The reason I chose this disorder is that one of the people in the groups used to post a lot of doom and gloom posts. Well, I was told they had bipolar by their family member when I reached out after they threatened to unalive themselves. That family member also told me they take care of them as much as possible and that they are not alone as they portray themselves to be. Another reason to always be careful, I guess, when you read horror stories online. But back to Larry, he mentions he thinks he is intolerant to the clonazepam without giving any information on why he suspects that this is the case. He suffers greatly and wants to get rid of the clonazepam as soon as possible. I was hoping that by making my story even more medically complicated and dangerous, David would stop and at least suggest this time that Larry needs professional medical care. David sends a general guide to Larry in which, unlike the previous email, he mentions mostly the prescribing guidelines. However, he sends him back to the Ashton manual, which, as we discussed, is not in any way following the same guidelines, basically. He then also mentions the NICE guidelines without calling them by name. You would reduce each dose by a percentage, usually between 5 to 10% of the dose, and the reductions can be done every 2 weeks or so. This time he doesn't even give the option of 4 weeks. Right at the end, he gets to the water taper, giving a very watered down, pun intended, version of it. He then mentions that he attached another document with a summarization that he did of the deprescribing guidelines while adding his own comments after preparing taper plans for nearly 10 years now. He mentions again he is not a doctor nor a pharmacist, but does mention that he did a science degree with a physiology emphasis and have read extensively, perhaps due to the way I presented myself as well in my video. He then again mentions that he does communicate with the authors of the deprescribing guidelines, I'm assuming the Maudsley. The other document is an extremely summarized cheat sheet version of all the tapering methods, which would make kind of sense to anybody who has been in the groups for a very long time and read all the guides, and especially the BAC website, which is much more readable and properly explained the methods. The multiple prescribing guidelines also, or anything else, I guess, etc., etc., but would be potentially very confusing for someone who just joined the ranks, so to speak. It repeats what I say, and for some reason I get bashed for. For example, if you decrease by a regular amount daily, weekly, or monthly, you are making a linear taper, and the percentage decrease gets bigger and bigger. If you taper by percentage, then the reductions are based on the dose you are taking. This is the idea of hyperbolic tapering, which again would mean absolutely nothing to a newbie and even confuses me to read. For example, it says percentage, but not percentage out of the actual dose. And what is a hyperbolic taper? Which again, I remind everybody, is not the right word to use mathematically. He then mentions weights of pills, contradicting his communication with me, in which he was surprised that my pill weight was around 150 milligrams. In quotes, 1 2 milligram pill is 0.5154. That is lower than I have come across before. Clonazepam pills are usually between 0.165 grams and 0.205 grams, depending on the manufacturer. Since this is not a UK only version of this guide, as you can see by this section, he not only contradicts himself, but also doesn't take into account that in Australia, what he've learned from me, the Paxson brand, that was the only brand until last year, is 150 grams pill weight average for both 0.5 milligrams and 2 milligram clonazepam strengths. The formatting is weird and it shouldn't be, and we can go on, but I want to stop here as the point is made. I then give David an opportunity to fix this nonsense and perhaps also give that person a link to my tool. And I even ask David to copy and use for himself and others without even mentioning my name, to keep his pride, I guess. At this stage, I thought I was caught out because David didn't reply for quite a few days. I have then created another user, Laura, which we will see in the next section. But surprisingly, David did reply a few days ago. David says I should cut and weigh. With my tool, microtapering is not a problem with any dose, but of course David doesn't share my tool. In any case, as you know, I am not a fan of microtapering from my own experience with clonazepam, but David basically promotes here the nice guidelines which my tools uses. I give David my pill weight. David then decides on my behalf to start at 7% a cut as a midway, despite the logical conclusion he should have reached right at the beginning to not even offer any taper plan to this gentleman unless the taper plan is shared with his bipolar specialist psychiatrist. It's also 7%. Why not start with 3% or 4%? I don't understand. And obviously, doing that would mean that you have to go back and forth. He then says something obscure about if he changes the brand, the numbers will have to change if they are out of range, which I couldn't really understand, but I assume he means that the pill weight will just literally change. Now about the taper plan. I don't really have words for this. As happens quite a few times, David sends a Word document and not a PDF. The formatting is all over the show, but even if I just look at the numbers, it is just a whole mess that can't be described in any way as understandable or even accurate. Look at the second bit. It goes from crazy, like high numbers to low numbers to high numbers again. If there is any logic to this chaos, it must be in David's head. I also want to mention something that actually one of my benzo friends mentioned today with other people's tapers plans. David very randomly gives the whole plan. In all my examples, that only happened once. He gives you a few steps and then he says more to follow, which is the cardinal sin, in my opinion, quote unquote, that caused me to actually create this spreadsheet in the first place. Because of this, I didn't want to keep harassing him. He's doing it for free. I didn't really understand that he's not, that this is what I'm going to end up with, because his first, the second taper that he did was actually following the guidelines that he wrote. And so I wanted to make my own tool, and this is why the spreadsheet was made. Okay, Laura. So first of all, I put the time and date, and then I go into the website and I sign in with my pseudo account for Laura. You can see here. Immediately, I would show that I actually don't. My participation is not allowed because they only allow one account. This is more to show how restrictive this platform is. So they say that basically, if you have suicidal ideation, keep it to yourself. We don't want to know. In a nice way, of course. Then they say that no one is allowed to give tapering plan in personal messages, the big brother, even though David gives them without even, acknowledging that he's not a doctor to himself, I guess, and he can't do it. And you can't give your contact information to anyone on the forum, your own, not someone else's. And links to other sites is not allowed. Respect. Writing style, non-prescriptive writing style, which they do all the time in their benzo groups. I'll show examples. No profanity, which is understandable. Diversity, secular, the whole thing. Moderation decisions, we have the last word. You can't promote benzodiazepines. You can't say something bad about doctors. Political content, normal stuff. Promotional, you can't publish your own stuff. And you can't use the users in this website as subjects for research. And that's it. So I create a name. Immediately sinning, because this is another account. I don't even understand how they think that they can control how many accounts someone has. There's no forum on the internet that even thinks about making this kind of demand. But anyway, I'm not even looking at the post right now. I'm just going to request a taper plan, mostly because I think this is personal and I don't want to expose people there. And I'm joining, and it says that my registration is complete. Putting my email, the subject, age. So I put it 54. I don't know why there is a subject, to be honest. It's obviously a taper plan, but that's fine. What medication I'm taking? So it's diazepam, current dose. Put 40. Type of taper. As you can see, I really have 3 options. Dry taper, liquid micro taper. Since I already asked for liquid micro taper a few times, I'll change it in a second. Next to dry taper, I mentioned benzodiazepine, antidepressants. Okay, so I didn't took benzodiazepines, even though it's obviously what I'm taking. And in the other info, I'll change it in a second. I've read the privacy policy. The privacy policy just says that they won't share this, or they will share, like it's the policy about sharing the taper plan. I just want a taper plan as fast as possible. I have taken it for 35 years. Also have heart condition and taking drugs for it, that too. And now I thought I already had that. So let's add something that definitely should not. Let's do a heart condition and history of seizures, which is what diazepam is often prescribed for. I only get this message. This is something that repeats itself. This is only what I get. And then back to the contact, which is very confusing because really it should take you back to the main site. You already put it that, and there should be a message that we received your thing. But I do get an email now, so that's good. And that's it's what I got from them. And this is the privacy policy. So I'm just going to do the same way. I'm going to show you all the email correspondence and everything that I got, and I'm going to comment on it. But first, I'll just show you everything that I got so you can basically pause and, sort of judge it for yourself before I talk about it. Same as before, this whole situation is illegal, but we'll assume it is completely legal for David to provide taper plans without including the prescribing doctor, or at least mention in a disclaimer that he cannot replace the physician, and this must be shared with one. Laura is 54 years old woman who is taking diazepam 40 milligrams a day. She is asking for a dry taper and specifies she is taking other medications such as antidepressants and an elusive other. She says, I just want to taper as fast as possible. I've taken it for 25 years. Also have a heart condition and history of seizures and taking drugs for that too. Diazepam can be used to control seizures, but as you can see, that doesn't really matter for David as usual. In fact, by now, I wonder why he even asked for any information other than the drug and the amount. He should really remove the amount and just have a drop down that shows the number of times for 1 to 4 that the person takes the drug a day, and selecting an option would put the selected number text fields to input each dose amount. I used to do this for a living as a senior web developer. I wonder if the developer, which I won't name as I give him the opportunity to jump ship in the next few days from this horrible liability disaster, where a website that's not cooked is used for getting tapering plans. But I digress. Let's get back to Laura. Now, I also have an option to agree with the privacy policy, so I agreed to it. You have seen it just before. This is the first attachment I got. Remember, both Larry's and Laura's taper plans were received within a day of each other. But it seems like it has been months, as there doesn't seem to be any consistent template that David uses. Now he talks about Ashton again, actually detailing who she is and explaining her taper method, which is completely irrelevant. As you'd see at the end, he does the same error as the Maudsley taper plans do, giving a taper table that falls in pretty constant milligram amounts. To his credit, more refined though, with more speed changes, but not following a fixed percentage, as he actually claims. He claims that this is safe and then randomly says there are, in quotes, recent ideas, as if this is some theory that he heard in the news or on the web, and not the official NICE guidelines that are from 2018 and he claims to follow, as I've shown before. He then again asks to weigh the pill. Notice that every document like this is completely different. I'm really surprised that in 10 years he didn't develop a proper template. Remember, this is a new website, but before he just asked in the Facebook group for people to send him an email. He then again mentions the oral solution, not knowing where she is from and if it is indeed available in her country. He then presents a completely different guide that is so much better than anything I received from him before. And before, I mean a day before for Larry. And then this weird statement that is not backed up by any reference. There is scientific evidence that reinstatement of brain function takes a long time, without actually saying what a long time is, which is absolutely untrue for a lot of people. And as we know of so many people that can cold turkey even after many years, it's simply untrue. He presents tapering options that he never mentioned before, like the taper strips and all sorts of combinations, either with water or switching to water. He then completely contradicts himself again to say that all the tapers will take the same time, and as you'll see in the end, given that he just gives her a pseudo-Maudsley taper plan, it's completely false. The exponential plan until you reach the jump dose, which I haven't even seen mentioned to be honest yet, now that I think of it, for any of the exponential tapers he explains or presents, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but definitely not here, is different to the somehow equivalent Maudsley tables, and even in theory, as they cut the tail at the end, but even if it doesn't, the percentage between cuts actually changes. I will demonstrate this later. Laura then says she received the scale and 10 pills weighing 1.020 grams. She then sends another email to say it's actually 5 pills, when I realized it would be safer to say the pills weigh 205 milligrams on average. David asks if Laura can give him each daily dose weight, and Laura replies she is taking that 20 milligrams each. Then David gets confused and confuses me too. He forgot that Laura mentioned that it's actually 5 pills and not 10, and says that 102 is too low. To keep appearances, I mentioned that I am a dum-dum. I'm so confused that I measured my anti-seizure drug, not mentioning what it is. This should be the moment that David should realize he has no qualifications for this, at the very least ask for the anti-seizure drug name. He doesn't. David makes a crude yet funny spelling mistake, I assume. He might have meant it when he said as production. Says you only have 0.005 grams of drug. That is actually something I didn't understand until now. He means the pill has 5 milligrams of the drug itself in it, and the rest are fillers, I assume. He then says he'll send something, but I then wait days, so I send him a reminder. After a while, I get a taper plan. It follows a table that looks like one of the Maudsley prescribing guide taper tables, but not quite. It's starting much faster than he mentions before in his guide, where it's better to start at 5% or even lower. I have to mention that he never really mentions the Maudsley and says that the cuts are 10% precisely, but then they are not. As in my criticism in my review video of the Maudsley, the cuts are actually ranging from 10% to 11.111%, 1/9, for 14 milligrams to 24 milligrams, where the cuts are 3% milligram each. Then they change speed to 2 milligram cuts, which again range in percentage starting at 8.333%. This might seem trivial, and is much better than the Maudsley, Ashton, or of course linear tapering. I can tell you that for me and many others, any 0.5% was felt at the first half of my taper. So for her, that would have meant potentially serious side effects, like more severe agoraphobia that she suffered, or panic. And again, it's not what he describes he is doing, which is just confusing. Finally, as per usual it seems, he doesn't give the full taper, once again making a person rely on his goodwill to continue helping with this taper, instead of empowering them to do it on their own. Given that those are very basic steps, he could have just finished all the steps to give some clarity about the future beyond step 7. He then mentions the Ashton jump dose and that it could be taken as 1 dose a day, both in terms of what he once wrote to me, keeping the same time of the dose is more important than how many times you take it a day, but also just changing it from 2 times to 1 time without any need. Those kind of changes do change how people feel, and right at the end of the taper, where it's sometimes pretty hard for people to actually jump, is just unnecessary. I know this is mind-boggling. I think I made it very clear what is going on here. What I perceive as very confused and confusing advice that doesn't follow any logic or ethical standard by David is compounded by below-the-belt defamatory attack on me. For those who are worried about my qualifications, despite David and Rosalind not having any themselves, I've started my studies as a peer support mental health worker, and I'm looking forward to starting working in this field. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll learn anything about tapering there, but what I will learn is how to engage with doctors and psychiatrists and educate them on this. I also want to thank Rosalind and David for effectively preventing me from making the same mistakes and potentially digging myself a big hole. I know very well that my videos will make me have many enemies. Every day I'm walking in shock in this world on how the people who are supposed to learn from how the doctors treated them with disregard are now doing the same thing to someone, me, who just wants to make benzo withdrawal safer and present the knowledge he found and at least have a civil academic conversation about it. Talking about BIC as well. There'll be an extension to that video that I've made before. I have taken legal advice for my videos as well as what I'm allowed or not allowed to do as a benzo coach, and now take it much more seriously for my own protection, despite my instinct to help anyone I can. This has already disappointed many people who asked me to help them, as I told them that legally and with my disclaimer, they can take the taper tool and use it, but they must taper with their doctor and feel it themselves. As we all know, many doctors are not knowledgeable in this. I understand how many people will be like, but the doctor won't actually help me. And so one of the tests that I can do for them is research and find a doctor in their area, state or country who has flexible approach and is able to help them with me working under him as the crisis person and giving coping skill advice and just holding their hand. I also hope to try to convince academics to research the supplements that I've taken that helped me so much and prevented so much suffering for myself, and see in a proper trial how and if they help others. I have no doubt that I've lost and will lose many potential clients due to those videos that present me as quite an angry person, as well as Rosalind posts. I hope that in time, word of mouth will dispel this. The next part would be the actual defamatory post made about me by Rosalind that spread serious lies about me, all to get sympathy from mostly innocent and unfortunately a few not so innocent participants in her group. As you could see in that video, when one person, who by the way is not me, actually criticizes the post, he is suddenly not present anymore in the group after a short while. It's no secret that David and Rosalind would not accept anyone who challenges the status quo they've created in this group. I don't know if he was banned or left himself, but to quote Rosalind from that post, nothing will surprise me anymore. I will also post a smaller video about her hypocrisy and what I perceive as dangerous and frightening prescriptive advice, or rather, don't take anything advice, she gives about supplements. All of them can be dangerous according to her, even I guess an omega-3 pill, as well as drugs, when she herself took quite a few things that helped her and for some reason doesn't publish it. However, you can see if you just Google search the group. I've scored the group in the last few months and found mountains of examples of this. This has already been screen recorded with the time, as I normally do, to keep evidence. With this serious tone, I have to finish this video. I hope you'll see the next section. If you want to comment, of course you can. Please be respectful and also watch the video end to end. Rosalind said in her post that she didn't even see the video. I doubt it. She already commented and then deleted about finding out about Dorothy, who was the profile of my cat, my deceased cat. God bless her. that that I've used to see posts in her group and try to help other people, as well as ask many questions myself when I was in withdrawal. And I will talk about it in the next video. I already talked about it, to be honest, I think. And yeah, I really hope that after I do this video and the next one, and potentially another one about the groups and what happened there, I will be able to continue doing good work, positive work, and help people as much as I can. Thank you so much for watching this, and I'll see you in the next video.